Hey, all. Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. 160 years ago today, July 3rd, 1863, one of the most momentous, one of the most consequential days in all of U.S. history. Arguably the most consequential, for on that day, as you students of the Civil War know, the Battle of Gettysburg was in its third day, and as it turns out, the culmination of the battle occurring at Pickett's charge, the division of General George Pickett going up against the Union forces, General Robert E. Lee's last ditch effort for his Northern Virginia, his Army of Northern Virginia, to break through the Union lines. If he was successful, we might have seen the end of the United States, the end of the country as we know it. Of course, that didn't happen. What did happen is a mass casualty event and the loss of many, many lives, the loss of military momentum from which the Army of Northern Virginia never really recovered. On that day, in the space of less than an hour, 8,000 casualties. 1,500 of those men were on the Union side, 6,555 on the Confederate side. The number is so large, it's hard to comprehend this volume of men being scattered over a relatively small patch of ground. And so I think it's appropriate to be able to pick out one of those men and his company to give you a sense, representative man and a company, to talk about the larger impact of all those casualties in that intense and brief bit of fighting. So his name is John Vermillion, and he's pictured right here. Let me tell you a little bit about him before the Battle of Gettysburg. He was born in Portsmouth, Virginia. He lived in Norfolk at the time that the war began. In 1861, he enlists as a private. His descriptive, the descriptive list for him describes him as 5'8", florid complexion, hazel eyes, red hair. Goes in to the 9th Virginia Infantry, Company K, proves to be a very good soldier, works his way up the ranks. He's a corporal in November of 1861, a sergeant in May of 1862. Then he becomes a 3rd lieutenant, gets rid of his chevrons and gets the spaghetti straps of a Confederate officer and the insignia on his collar. That's in August of 1862. And then he makes 2nd lieutenant in October of 1862. He serves in that capacity at the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863. So the record of Gettysburg for Vermillion and his comrades, and by that time he had transferred. When he became an officer, he went from Company K to Company I. Company I brought 36 men into action at Pickett's charge on July 3rd. I have an account that I want to read you. It's actually 2 brief accounts, which will give you a sense of the devastation that was wrought on Company I of the 9th Virginia and Vermillion during that little space of less than an hour. So here's the first passage I want to read to you. And so here it goes. Quote, just before the Battle of Gettysburg, Private Mills Brinkley, it's one of the enlisted men in Vermillion's company, had one of those mysterious presentiments or premonitions of approaching death. While the regiment was passing up Cemetery Hill in the charge of Pickett's division, he turned to Lieutenant Niemeyer, and Lieutenant Niemeyer is Vermillion's superior officer. He's the 1st lieutenant, and Vermillion is 2nd lieutenant. So Brinkley, Private Brinkley, turns to Lieutenant Niemeyer, who, with Lieutenant Vermillion, was at his post in rear of the line, and told him he felt as if he were going to be killed, and asked permission to leave the ranks. Lieutenant Niemeyer refused his request and ordered him to take his place in the line. Lieutenant Vermillion joined in his request. Vermillion reminded Lieutenant Niemeyer that Brinkley had always proved himself a brave and good soldier, but Lieutenant Niemeyer again refused, and Brinkley resumed his position in the ranks. He had hardly taken 20 steps further in advance when a piece of shell struck him in the forehead, killing him instantly. That's Brinkley. He's now gone. In a very few minutes afterwards, Lieutenant Niemeyer was himself killed. So in this moment, Pickett's division, the company of the company I of the 9th Virginia, is moving forward. Now, Lieutenant Niemeyer, the second lieutenant of the company, is gone. Brinkley is gone. Immediately, we're down to 34 men. Captain Crocker is still up and standing. He's the company commander. So you've got 34 men left who are moving forward in that line. And what happens next is just devastating. Now, I want to read you the casualty list to give you a sense of what happened to one company of Virginians and Confederates in Pickett's charge. You've got, again, 36 men go in and 24 land on the casualty list. And I find a reading of this list just sort of powerful. So let me go through it quickly. Here it is. Captain J.O. Crocker, captured. First Lieutenant John C. Niemeyer, killed. Second Lieutenant John Vermillion, wounded and captured. Sergeant McKemmy Lewis, wounded. Color Sergeant Joshua Grimes, wounded. Frank M. Arthur, captured. These are all privates now. Belson Barnes, wounded. W.D. Bidgood, captured. Mills Brinkley, that's the man who had the premonition, killed. Granville Brinkley, captured. Daniel Brinkley, survived. Richard Carney, wounded. Hosea Capps, wounded and captured. John D. Gomer, survived. George W. Gwynn, wounded. Reuben Harrell, captured. R.H. Herring, survived without injury. Humflet J.T., wounded. Nathan E.K. Jones, wounded and captured. John L. Jordan, wounded. Richard Lassiter, survived uninjured. Jesse Norfleet, killed. William J. Parker, survived unwounded. George Clay Richardson, survived unwounded. Thomas Robbie, captured. Amos Riddick, captured. John E. Stringer, survived unwounded. William J. Skeeter, unwounded, survived. Benjamin Small, wounded. J. Van Stallings, survived. Benjamin Taylor, captured. Williamson B. Taylor, unwounded. William H. Van, wounded. Henry Wilkins, survived, unwounded. Henry Walton, wounded. And George Wilkins, unwounded and survived. So you have a sense of one company, 24 of the 36 men wound up on the casualty list, including, as you heard me say, Vermillion, who was wounded and captured. I was not able to find out the nature of his wound, but one detail I did find was a report that mentions he was standing very close to General Lewis A. Armistead, who you students of the Civil War know was quite dramatically mortally wounded as he had his sword in his hat, a friend of Winfield Scott Hancock's, right up towards the edge of the line. So that's how I'm able to place Vermillion so close, because he was right up there with Armistead. And the nature of his wound and his capture, that is Vermillion, suggests to me that his wound may have helped him survive, because he was either wounded and fell and was trapped and was captured, or was captured immediately after he was wounded. Whatever happened there, if he had tried to withdraw from the battlefield in the face of all that Union fire so close up, he might have been wounded again or killed as he tried to make his way back. But he did survive. Survive he did. And so he goes on to live a quiet life. Someone describes him as a gentle and generous man. He never marries, and he lives until 1911. The rest of the war he spent after Gettysburg as a prisoner. he was taken to Johnson's Island in Ohio, and he remained there for a while. And then he was eventually sent to Fort Delaware in Delaware, from where he signed the oath of allegiance to the federal government in June of 1865. So I can't help but wonder, what impact did Pickett's charge and the rest of the war and his imprisonment have on him? The price that he must have paid. Of course, we didn't know what post traumatic stress disorder was back then, but during the wartime, to be with your company, one of the officers of your company, to have that experience with Mills Brinkley, the private who had the premonition of death, to see your commanding officer, Niemeyer, shot down just after he told Brinkley to go back to the ranks, and then to lead your men and suffer so much loss. Hard to imagine. It's hard to think about. It's unimaginable, the mental impact of all of that. And in case of Vermillion, we don't know. He didn't leave behind anything, or better said, we haven't found anything yet that he's left behind, that he's given us some sense of his mental state. Perhaps someday we'll find a letter or some other bit of information to shed some light on that. So I'll leave you here for today, the 160th anniversary of Pickett's charge and the end of the Battle of Gettysburg. Take care.